Horror is potentially the greatest genre when it comes to pushing boundaries in what any kind of medium can do and really innovating inside those spheres. This is especially true in video games, and it's often the indie guys who are really doing the heavy lifting. So it's time to give some well-deserved laurels to some of the indie titles that have changed horror gaming forever. I'm Jess from WhatCulture, and here are 10 indie horror games that changed everything. Number 10, Limbo, Playdead. Brimming with atmosphere and interesting mechanics, as well as a bunch of gruesome scenarios for when things don't go right for your little protagonist, Limbo is an absolutely gorgeous and inventive game that definitely inspired a lot of games that came after in the horror genre. As a puzzle platforming 2D side-scroller, the thoughtful complexity put into its solutions balances well with the simplicity of its visuals and story. It's thought-provoking without being overfilled with unnecessary bells and whistles. Its visual style is easy to identify, iconic in its dreamlike shadowy black, white, and grey, and it also made a splash with its horrifically gory deaths for its child protagonist, which discouraged repeat mistakes in gameplay because they were rough. Some similarly dark horror games which definitely seem to have taken inspiration from Limbo but came out in more recent years include Little Nightmares and Bramble the Mountain King. Despite reported interference by investors during the production, independent studio Playdead was able to bring such a unique and brilliant vision to the gaming world, and they were rewarded with both critical and commercial acclaim when the game came out in 2010. And there was another Playdead production Inside that came out in 2016, which, dare I say, is just as good. Number 9, Slay the Princess, Black Tabby Games. Perhaps too new to be as influential as some of the other games on this list, Slay the Princess is nonetheless very novel in what it manages to do in terms of storytelling-based games, and also storytelling-based games that let you make particular choices at many pivotal points. With its clever writing and protagonists, Slay the Princess presents nigh endless possibilities for choice and outcome. Slay the Princess mixes tongue-in-cheek humor and ghastly horror with questions about the nature of existence, choice, and relationships. The outcome of each unique choice reflects the player in ways that often feel uncomfortable, with every playthrough different from the rest, despite at first seeming to repeat certain beats. That said, there is a certain simplicity that the game seems built around, which is give the princess love and respect and compassion, and she returns it. Give the princess violence, and she returns that. But with every reset, players will see just how branching those paths really are, and gameplay can go from some classic supernatural scares to full-scale cosmic horror. The evocative art by Abby Howard from Black Tabby Games and compelling performances by Jonathan Sims and Nicole Goodnight really bring it all together as an unforgettable and affecting experience of a game. Number 8, DoyDoki Literature Club, Team Salvato. There are two things that make DoyDoki stand out from the rest of the bunch when it comes to a horror gaming genre, which, as you know, is incredibly saturated and has been for quite some time. The first is the way that the game was marketed, by burying the lead and letting word of mouth really sell this one while trusting people weren't going to spoil it. And the second is its somewhat invasive mechanics, at some points even digging into your game files on your computer. Marketing itself at first as a simple run-of-the-mill dating sim with cute anime schoolgirls, it takes a violently dark turn when one of the main love interests, the cheery and bubbly childhood friend Sayuri, commits suicide by hanging. And from this moment, the game takes a horrifically dark turn, with Sayuri literally erased from the game, including save files which record her existence. There are also other heavy themes like child abuse, self-harm, and deep, dark obsession, and these culminate into certain sections of the game where you actually have to dig into the game files in order to progress. This seemingly simple dating sim turned horror game is one of the most innovative in recent memory, though these days most people know about its twist and its massively triggering content. That said, if you still haven't played it, even if you do know about it, it's absolutely worth checking out. Number 7, Phasmophobia, Kinetic Games. Despite its reputation as being janky and full of bugs, Kinetic Games' Phasmophobia nonetheless made a splash in the horror game space as a fun and interesting multiplayer co-op that incorporated interesting mechanics. The first-person viewpoint naturally makes people more vulnerable to the game's scares when they do happen, and it's the minimal interference from the haunts and the game's ghosts that makes it all the more effective. Having a ghost flash into existence with nary a warning can really get the heart pumping, especially if you're playing it in VR. The ghost hunting aspect also gives it a simple, straightforward goal with some more complex mechanics. Its innovative gameplay, atmospheric audio, and the timing of its 2020 release made a big splash with co-op players, popularly boosted by streamers who played it with friends. It would eventually be followed by other games of that ilk like Lethal Company, which borrowed its silly, chaotic, and still frightening nature. Number 6, Dead by Daylight, Behavior Interactive. Despite its gigantic following and budget, able to license multiple horror icons as enemies in its games, Dead by Daylight, or DBD, was created by Canadian indie studio Behavior Interactive. It was available in early access for many years before it exploded in popularity, taking time to become the smash hit that it is today. With intriguing and surprisingly fluid third-person survival horror co-op mechanics and the option to switch between survivor and killer, it's both a unique take on the genre and a success that many would want to replicate. Since it finished polishing up its core gameplay mechanics, the game is pretty much focused on bringing in those big names in horror and adding them to its roster of unique killers, which has sort of kept the multiplayer sphere running and exciting since the game launched way back in 2016. A similar game that released after it was Sony's Friday the 13th video game adaptation, which has a similar appeal but doesn't quite capture the variety and polish that won DBD its ongoing success. Number 5, The Mortuary Assistant, Darkstone Digital. The Mortuary Assistant made a big splash not just for its interesting mechanics that were doing something really unique, but also for the fact that it highlighted YouTube's uneven policies regarding censorship. Besides that, however, the Mortuary Assistant is an interesting mix of strangely engaging task-based gameplay and standard, if often effective, horror jump scares. The most effective scares are those that don't jump so much as wait for you to notice them out of your periphery before disappearing. It could be marketed as a cozy horror game if not for how disturbing it is, but that's in its favor. The lull of achieving tasks helps relax the player so that the scares feel even more effective. The scares on this one are a little similar to if you happen to watch Day 9 TV, and back in the day he was playing one of the Nancy Drew games where they were at a ryokan and they had to basically spend an hour solving a Sudoku, and obviously the focus was completely on the Sudoku, and then when you turn around there's a ghost figure there. Now it's not particularly high fidelity or scary, but since you're lulled into a false sense of security by just sitting there and doing a task, it's particularly effective and very fun for people to watch. With its smart puzzle elements and multiple endings challenging you to pay attention even when you're stressed from scares, Darkstone Digital's surprising 2022 title got a lot of well-earned attention. Number 4, I'm on Observation Duty, Notovia. Kicking off a slew of what would come to be known as anomaly games, I'm on Observation Duty basically takes the classic game of Spot the Difference and makes it absolutely horrifying. The game casts the player as someone assigned to watch and flip through security cameras to look for anomalies or changes in the rooms you're observing. The anomalies can be as simple as switch furniture or as terrifying as an inhuman intruder, and while most of the game can be played either in a state of constant anxiety or relaxed puzzle solving, some of the anomalies really come at you hard and fast, forcing you to resolve them on a timer before it's too late. Because of the simplicity and the more accessible way that its gameplay would be for new and smaller development studios, we've seen a lot more games of this ilk come out that either sort of replicate or build on its core mechanic. Notable examples include Exit 8 and Shinkansen Zero, which build upon the simple mechanic with some more immersive walkthrough elements. Impressively, these groundbreaking games appear to have been developed by a single person, Notovia, who truly changed the indie horror landscape with these games. Number 3, Slender the 8 Pages, Parsec Productions. It cannot be overstated how big of a deal Slender has been for popular culture, particularly the horror genre. It also can't be overstated how relieved and excited I was when I picked up all the 8 pages before this was a full game. Oh my gosh, never gonna play that game again. Despite how simple, janky, hard to control, and largely one-note it is as a game, with crude graphics and a small map, it was surprisingly a smash hit. The single creator under Parsec Productions created something that resonated to millions of players, and for good reason. Its simplicity in both story and mechanics, attempting to gather 8 pages of children's drawings while Slender Man stalks you in the woods, lends well to the horror, enhancing the already viral success of online urban legend Slender Man and inviting many copycats. It's hard to control gameplay, lack of resources, and overall difficulty level when it comes to actually just mechanically trying to pick up the 8 pages without dying. And by the way, if you don't do all 8, you have to go back to the beginning because this was a tiny little janky game. Make it feel just like an absolute relief and one of your greatest moments in life when you actually pull it off. Especially because those inside sections where you're stuck are so hard to get out of if he's chasing you. Outside in the woods, no problem. Those inside areas are no joke. However, even as influential as this was, the game took direct inspiration from the #1 entry on this list, which we'll get to shortly. Number 2, Five Nights at Freddy's, Scott Cawthon. Yep, there's no way we were going to get away without mentioning FNaF. Whether you're a hardcore fan who's gone down all the rabbit holes of exactly what happened in the bite of 79, I can't remember the year, or you're a new fan, or perhaps you don't like the game at all, it's inarguable that this is synonymous with indie horror. And there have been plenty of imitators that came after it, not to mention like a bazillion sequels. The original game's premise and mechanics are brilliantly simple and extremely stressful, and despite criticisms of its simplistic jump scares, the nearly impossible resource management aspect really lends itself to the horror. The player has access to security cameras they can flip through to track any movement, as well as buttons to turn lights on and shut doors, and a fast depleting battery for all of those. The limited visibility and anxiety of resource management make this game a stressful and terrifying experience, which of course makes it a fantastic horror game. It would spawn an entire franchise, including a Hollywood film, inspire many in indie horror, but most prominently it would inspire an entire genre of mascot horror. Its influence would also be unparalleled if it wasn't for the next entry. And if you know, you know. I think you probably know. Number 1, Amnesia: The Dark Descent, Frictional Games. Amnesia: The Dark Descent really took the horror genre by storm when it came out. Now, I don't want to discount Penumbra, which Frictional did before Amnesia, but this was really what put them on the map. The relative simplicity of its visuals lent to the terror of its atmosphere and the helplessness of its protagonist. Everything here is grotty, gritty, disgusting, and oppressive, which works wonderfully well with its iconic tone. The puzzle-solving aspect of the game plays well, or terribly depending on how you look at it. There's the wandering threats, and then of course your ever-diminishing sanity, a meter which is affected by remaining in darkness, witnessing certain horrors, or looking at Amnesia's grotesque monsters for too long. The sanity meters, the unarmed horror protagonist, and the puzzle-solving sections would be elements that were borrowed by many indie and non-indie horror games that would come after it. This included survival horror Outlast, where fighting back is not an option, only running and hiding. As mentioned earlier, Slender was also inspired by Amnesia as well as Layers of Fear. Frictional Games also released its in-house game engine for fans to create custom levels, which is pretty cool. The studio would also go on to create other acclaimed horror titles such as Soma, which is such an incredible experience. If you haven't had the pleasure, trust me, you want this one on your list. I mean, lots of these entries you'd want on your list. Your list is getting long, but you'll have a good time.